First, he wants her to realize that there is darkness under the sun, even if it makes her think that he is a bad person. The girl carefully knocks on the bathroom door where Brandon is. He responds angrily, shouting and demanding that she not interfere with him while he's in the shower. From his sharp, rude answer, the girl gets scared and apologizes, explaining that she brought him clean clothes. The guy orders her to leave the clothes at the door and get out immediately. The drooping girl, with neatly folded things in her arms, stands uncertainly. The guy grumbles, dissatisfied with the girl's obedience, because it will be difficult for her to survive in their post-apocalyptic world. However, he immediately turns his attention to the shower. He could not wash himself for a long time and enjoys the warm water. As the number of zombies increases, more and more sources will become polluted. In a few days, the water is expected to be cut off. He remembers turning off the water and thinks that fortunately, they are in the store, so the supplies here will last for quite a long time. The next thing he plans to do is search for equipment and weapons. Looking at himself in the mirror, he notes that it is nice to see himself young again, young and with tender skin, no back pain, no pain in the legs. It's good to be young. He concludes that the only problem is with the abs. He will need to work on the muscles in this area. The main character, wearing only a towel, opens the bathroom door. A couple of minutes later, a scream is heard from him. He is unhappy that the girl gave him a suit because it is inconvenient to fight zombies in it. The gang leader gathers all his subordinates at headquarters. He reports that this karaoke bar has alcohol and food, but they can't stay in this hole for long. They need to create another survival base to cope with future difficulties. First of all, he sets a goal to go out and kill all the zombies in the territory, and after that, take over the store and provide himself with food. Additionally, a nice girl lives in this store, the concerned bandit notes. She is the only one left, with the exception of the schoolboy who recently ran there. He gives the green light to his servants, ordering them to kill all the zombies and take over the store. The girl sitting at the cash register is eating a cookie and waiting for Brandon after his shower. The main character is indignant that she did not answer his question and tells her to get out of there. He asks if she lives here alone and where her family is now. She reveals that her father left to replenish supplies and promised to return. Still hiding behind the counter, he scolds her for the frivolity with which she let him in, because he could have done something bad. Vanessa tries to justify herself by saying that he shouted that he was wounded, and she saw him covered in blood. He continues to yell at her, asking if she saw that zombies were chasing him and if she even thought about what was happening. He clutches his head and complains that such a naive coward will eventually become only a burden for him, and it's better to get rid of her before it's too late. However, he admits that he would be bored alone. There is no one to even take care of him if something happens. Brandon declares that from now on, she will be obliged to do whatever he says. If she disobeys, he will kill her. One of the zombies attacks a guy from the gang from behind, biting his ear to the meat. Other zombies pile on him, eating him alive as the others watch. They did not expect the zombies to go berserk, especially since the schoolboys had somehow defeated them. The leader demands that they continue to fight the creatures. One of the frightened guys, a red-haired skinny man, screams and tries to run away in panic. However, the main bandit grabs the fleeing man by the hair and brings him back. He throws him straight into the crowd of the dead to be torn to pieces, demonstrating to the others what will happen if they escape. As the red-haired man is torn apart, he screams and asks how the bandit could do this. The rest of the gang members are tensely fighting off the zombies with improvised means, but their numbers are increasing. The leader commands a retreat due to the overwhelming number of creatures. They retreat, but zombies are still chasing them. A girl comes into Brandon's room with boiled noodles on a tray. Brandon sits and twirls the green ball he had obtained earlier in his hand. He rudely tells the girl to get lost and orders her not to disturb him until he calls. She obediently agrees and closes the door behind her. After the door slams, Brandon pounces on the food, eagerly eating the noodles with a plastic fork. Overjoyed by the delicious food, he blushes at the nostalgic taste of the instant noodles. In a few years, such noodles will become a real delicacy due to a shortage of products. Having received his portion of noodles, Brandon tells the girl that nothing more is required from her and orders her not to disturb him until he calls. She quickly ducks out the door, and Brandon, without wasting time, devours the hot food. In this safe moment, food is his comfort, and he can't help but smile, remembering its nostalgic taste. He also notes that in the future, these same noodles will become a universal delicacy. The joyful moment does not last long. Brandon suddenly hears a noise from the street. Before he has time to think, there is a sharp sound of breaking glass, and a man's tough, human hand appears among the fragments. This man turns out to be an enemy from the protagonist's past, a red-haired man with a strong build, many scars on his rough skin, and a cruel, pompous look with a desire for poisonous power. The guy meets him with a sharp and dry look, as he had foreseen his appearance in advance and had been ready for revenge a long time ago. With one hand resting on the windowsill and his whole body hanging over the ground, the man shouts at Brandon to help him immediately, threatening that if he doesn't help, he will kill him. Quickly grabbing a thermos of hot water, Brandon heads towards the enemy. At that moment, boiling water pours onto the man's hard palm, causing a strong burn and steam. The man screams at the top of his lungs and loosens his grip, almost falling back. The boiling water continues to pour out of the vessel, leaving him no chance of salvation. Throughout the entire action, Brandon grins and says to the man that if he wanted to kill him, he would continuously do it first. Suddenly, Brandon's hand is grabbed and pulled back by the girl, which he did not expect. She stutters and feebly begs him to stop, still trying to pull him away from the broken window and the man with glassy eyes. She pleads with Brandon to let him in quickly and not to harm him. The main character instantly fixes his gaze on her and orders her to leave the room, reminding her of her promise not to enter until called. Besides, she did not even know the person she was so ardently defending. With a naive face, the girl stubbornly continues to babble about how her father told her not to hurt people. There is silence in the room as both men stare at her like she is a fool. However, that's how she looks at that moment. Brandon loses his temper and yells at her, asking if she is really not afraid, and doesn't foresee that this man could simply finish her off. He wastes no time, having long ago managed to change position and lean on his other working hand. He begins to climb into the room, pretending to be a good-natured person and saying that he, of course, did not intend to kill her or cause harm. He was just hungry and, in desperation, decided to look for food while being surrounded by zombies. The only way out was to climb here. He also doesn't want to jump back into the crowd, and if the girl were so kind, she would definitely let him sit out for a while, and he would immediately leave when the zombies dispersed. Looking angrily at her, Brandon thinks that he should have pushed the man back into the crowd as soon as possible. Then his chances of survival would have been reduced immediately, but it was not right to kill him in front of the girl. By that time, the man's foot had already crossed the threshold of the windowsill. Brandon immediately fixes his gaze on the stationary knife lying on the cabinet. The bastard fully appears in the room and with a disgusting grin declares that now this place belongs to him and anyone who dares to disobey him will die. The silly girl, naive in her kindness, is immediately horrified by his words and freezes in fear. Meanwhile, the man's supporters who remained in their lair were holding the door with their backs against it as the zombies relentlessly broke through. The eldest among them indignantly told the boy that, due to their chief's idiotic idea, they were now doomed to death. They could have held out here for several more months. Their captives were huddled in the distance of the room, covering their heads with their hands. The man kept shouting that their leader, nicknamed 𝗧𝗴𝗵𝗁, would die in the same place where he had taken refuge. As the dead almost broke down the doors and advanced more and more, the men began to lose strength and patience. Baldy yelled at the women, ordering them to get up and help hold the entrance. In the next moment, the entire group of 4 people held the doors, while the man perversely thought only about how he did not have time to enjoy himself with the ladies in the absence of their boss. All that remained was to run to the balcony and jump while everyone was blocking the door. Meanwhile, the red-haired man stood near the broken window and grinned at the helplessness of the teenagers. Laughing at the girl, he said how sweet and naive she was for still letting him in and believing his kind fairy tales. Now, instead of killing her, he would teach her everything and make her his slave. Immediately switching his hate-filled gaze to Brandon, he recalled how he had been scalded with boiling water and declared that feeding him to zombies would be too easy. Instead, he would come up with a more sophisticated method of killing him. First, he would crush his bones, then chop up his limbs, and when they were dry, he would stuff them into flower vases. Meeting his fantasies with an indifferent gaze, Brandon held the knife in his hand and remained silent. The girl kept trying to stop the villain with empty persuasion, exclaiming that their family owned the store and that there was a lot of food downstairs, enough for everyone. Spicy sticks, chocolates, instant noodles, and bar-shaped cookies. Everyone fell into a stupor at her pitiful appearance and the stupidity, but she did not stop smiling, offering to eat together and forget all the problems. The man lost his composure and furiously attacked the girl. In an instant, Brandon covered her, and with one wave of his hand, neutralized the attack attempt, cutting off the man's fingers with the cold blade of the knife. He burst out screaming, and Brandon, with the cold look of a killer, prepared for the next attack, aiming for the man's throat. Immediately noticing his action, the red-haired man grabbed Brandon's hand, and the sharpened end of the metal shone as it stopped right at his neck. He then threw the schoolboy to the floor, face down, and with a hard kick, sent him to the end of the room. He also threw the girl to the side with a single blow of his hand. Puffing in pain while holding the hand with the severed fingers, the man slowly made his way toward Brandon. Nothing had taken so much from him in his entire life as this boy lying on the floor. Brandon was losing strength. It seemed the man had broken his ribs with that blow. At that moment, the red-haired man pressed his heavy boot onto Brandon's leg, causing him to cry out in pain. He stated that before he killed him, he wanted to know how Brandon dealt with zombies so easily. Brandon just grinned and muttered that if the man treated him more respectfully, he might reveal his secret. This irritating answer only fueled the man's anger further. He began aggressively kicking Brandon with a force that could bring a person to death. Brandon could only cover himself with one hand. Furious that trying to teach the girl a lesson had turned into this, he couldn't stand it and rattled off for the man to stop, declaring that he would tell him everything. He pulled him by the collar and demanded that he give out the information as quickly as possible, but the man only spat blood in his face. This drove the man into a rage. He lost all patience and went wild, throwing Brandon with all his might into the wall. He kicked him, and with eyes full of hatred, assured Brandon that this was not a game. Otherwise, he would play with him only until his death. Starting with a kick, the man continued to beat Brandon with vicious kicks to the face and jaw. Suddenly, a blade flashed as the handle was gripped by both palms of a woman's hands. Vanessa grabbed the knife and plunged it into the bastard's forearm. He got distracted and immediately demolished the girl with one blow from his hand. With his fingers cut off, taking the knife out of the deep wound, the man turned completely towards her. The red-haired man's angry roar filled the room, and he sharply swung the tip of his blade at the girl in order to finish her off. But he didn't have time. His head was immediately pierced by an iron pipe. Soon the man was lying motionless on the floor, face down, with a pool of scarlet blood flowing from his head, while Brandon stood behind him, leaning exhaustedly with his hand on the end of the pipe. The girl looked in fear at the pool of blood, unable to believe that the big man was dead. The palms and sleeves of her white shirt were covered in blood, and with tears in her eyes, the girl realized that, for the first time, she had killed a person. The protagonist's male hand rested on her shoulder with a calming gesture. The schoolboy, in a quiet voice, assured the little girl that everything was fine. She did what she had to do with this bastard. Vanessa looked at the floor with full eyes of despair and explained that she just wanted to help him. The girl did not at all understand such a reciprocal attitude towards herself. Meanwhile, Brandon felt the man's pulse and discovered that he was still alive. He quickly ordered the girl to calm down and go wash. With hope in her eyes, the little girl sadly asked the guy if, in this case, he needed help immediately. At the same moment, Vanessa was already flying straight to the door. All that could be heard was the guy's angry insults and parting words addressed to her. Afterwards, Brandon locked the door and headed towards the big man's body. How this girl annoys me, he thought, with thoughts that this freak had ruined his room. The guy grabbed him by the leg and dragged him to the window in order to get rid of him once and for all. After he reached the broken window, he began to hang the body over the sill. With a kick, the man flew down under the indifferent gaze of the protagonist. The crowd of zombies immediately smelled the smell of human flesh. Lying motionless on the wet asphalt, At that same second, the man was surrounded by the dead on all sides. He could only live the last seconds of his life in agony. As parting words, Brandon shouted to him that if he had a better knife, he would have cut off all his limbs before throwing him off. Suddenly, the guy looked to the side and saw the youngest of their team frantically climbing down the wall of the building opposite. The schoolboy called out to him and asked if there were survivors where he came from. The guy answered in the negative and said that while they were trying to barricade themselves, someone loosened their grip, resulting in the zombies breaking through and killing everyone. Only he remained alive. Afterwards, he hopefully asked Brandon if he could help him and assured that, in this case, he would come over to their side. With a tired gesture, the main character refused the guy and advised him to run away if he did not want to end up in the place of their main character. Quickly glancing down, the guy realized the situation and jumped to the side. He managed to find support on a balcony railing and not fall down, after which he quickly ran in the opposite direction. The main character only carelessly looked down at him from the window from where he had recently thrown the corpse out. He was upset that the zombies didn't eat them all, and then shouted to the guy so that he wouldn't get in his way and cause problems.